November 8th, 2018, 12:36 in the morning, we get that middle of the night phone call. Our daughter, Elena, was a freshman at Pepperdine University, had gone out to college night for line dancing at Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California, named the safest city in America. We knew where she was. She told us she was going. We encouraged her to go out. Everything went from there. You know, you get that phone call, and nobody wants a phone call in the middle of the night. It's never good, right? And so our friends from Pepperdine, he was a religion professor there and a longtime friend, and his wife, Chris and Amy, called and said, Hannah, Eric, we're calling. There's been a shooting. It's at Borderline. You know, we're praying everything's okay. There's a lot of students there. Elena was there. You know, of course, we're praying, we're hoping that everything's okay. We turn on the news and you can see the chaos going. Immediately we called my brother, my brother Adam had been in with Fox News for 12 years, and he was stationed in Los Angeles. So I called him and asked him to go see if he can find out what's going on. There was still chaos. Called Adam, called my wife's sisters and family to let everybody know kind of what was going on. Our son at the time was 14. We let him sleep because, you know, he was obviously at home with us and didn't, of course, we're hoping everything's fine. Mm-hmm. Finally, my wife is like, Eric, can we please turn off the TV? Like, it's just repeating typical 24-hour news. We had called our very close friends, Dave and Lori, who came over to be with us at that point. And the hours continued, like every second turned to minutes. And every time, every tick away just was one more, like, she was a smart girl. We look back at it, it happened around 11:22 p.m. the night before. So now we're at 1:30. It's like she would have found a way to get a hold of us. There was a moment at that point that Pepperdine called to let us know, hey, we're just checking in with you. We're still looking. We're still, you know, finding, because there's people at the hospitals. There's a lot of chaos. And the words that came out of my mouth was, I said, how many other students are missing? I was hoping to not be alone.
Yeah.
And she said, none, just Elena. At some point in that window, Hannah, my wife, said, she's got her iWatch that we bought her for her 18th birthday. Mm-hmm. And she goes, let me find my iPhone. And she clicked up her phone and we saw that it was still in the bar. So it's like, okay, did it drop going out? But then every minute that ticked by was kind of the realization. At that point, they were still saying there was people hiding in the building because they were trying to go in. So, but it's getting further and further closer to the reality of what I think we knew from the moment we got the phone call. You know, like as a parent, you know.
Yeah. Did you have an intuition sense about it?
Yeah, right away. We had that intuition, and of course we wanted to hold on to hope and faith. And I started immediately texting her, thinking if she's in the bar hiding, because they were saying that was happening. You know, I love you. And then I thought, shoot, I hope it's not sitting there buzzing and dinging, and he's walking around looking for more people, right?
Oh, that's way too much. That's
horrible,
man.
I mean, so many of these pieces start to fall into place. Obviously, the inevitable happened. We called a friend who put me in touch with the local chaplain, and this is about probably 2:30 or so in the morning, 3 in the morning. He said, Eric, if she's still alive, do you want to be down there to give her a hug and just to be there and console her and help her through this? And I said, yes. And he goes, and if the inevitable is probably real, you know you need to be there. And I said, yes. And he goes, so you know what to do. And so then at that point, we booked our flights and such. We got down there. My brother picked us up, drove us back, and then we were informed. You kind of, everybody files into a room and you sit there, and we kept I just needed him to tell us. Mm-hmm. You know, we knew, but I wanted it to be official that they told us. We were informed, television cameras in our face as we came out of the building. We took off. When my wife wanted to go over to Pepperdine to go to the chapel. If you've ever been to Pepperdine campus,
I haven't.
it's in Malibu overlooking the ocean. It's pretty phenomenal. So it was one of those, like, I just need kind of that serenity. My wife and I, it's hard to explain, but it's, if you've heard of the difference of post-traumatic growth versus post-traumatic stress disorder.
I haven't.
So the opposite of PTSD is what they call PTG. And post-traumatic growth, I believe at UC Irvine, they actually have a whole department on it now, or some studies going on. And it's almost the exact opposite that happens to people after tragic or immense events of the sort. And we kind of have had that where there's a difference in positivity, mindset, faith, things that change in a different way versus most people with PTSD of just the constant, we didn't really go through the stages of grief. Like literally when I went to therapy, it was 5 or 6 sessions. I finally looked at him. I said, so I'm at acceptance, sorrow, 100%, right?
Yeah.
But I'm at acceptance. Like in 6 months, am I going to all of a sudden be angry or am I going to be in denial? And he's like, no, once you've gone through it, you don't really go back into it, right? There may be other reasons why you deal with those things, but
Did you go through anger and denial at any
None of
point?
it.
And you just went right to acceptance?
straight to acceptance. And we don't really understand why. I mean, of course, before it was, official, but we were literally hours when we were already we kind of knew deep down, but it wasn't until we kind of knew like, okay, fly down because they're going to be telling us officially that this is what's happened. And so, yeah, we both jumped right through it and don't really understand that piece of it.
So you guys got closer as a result of this?
Yeah, very much so. You can see how events of tragedy can pull families apart,
Sure,
or pull them together. And this, for us, it pulled us together in a big way.
There's good that can come from these things, right? And one of them is, for me, the ability to see problems differently. There was so many things that used to frazzle me before or upset me or feel like that needed attention or that was worth getting angry about. There's very few of those after this. Did you experience anything like that where it puts in perspective where it's worth putting emotion and where it's not worth putting emotion in life?
Yeah, 100%. Like I notice it now, very much so that when I see things, I look at it and I don't let it change my mindset. During COVID, I remember a parent going, like literally, school shutdowns, this is the worst thing that could ever happen. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, really? Like, and I try not to say it to make it seem like I need something out of it, because I really don't. But I sit there and go like, you need to get perspective, because this could be much worse than a really sucky event that the kids get stuck and it was horrible. And I think it's changed our society in many ways. And so I really realized like we as society really don't talk about grief and resilience and such. And versus there's some cultures that they really embrace it. And so that's where it's kind of like understanding what makes sense and how you want to do it. If you had the power to say, Arik, you have the choice of having Elena for 18 years or someone else for a lifetime, it's not a choice to me. I take Elena, right? And as hard as it is and as short as it was for us, it was still just such a gift. And she was such a blessing to all of us that we really feel that love from her. And I still feel her every day.
I was going to ask that. I had a guest on who definitely still feels his son, and he knows where he can go. And I don't know if communicate is the right word, but do you have any experiences like that you can share where you feel her presence or maybe you hear from her? What is it?
Yeah, I have many. One of the chapters in my book is called Signs, and it talks about like things that have happened. My wife's experience, and she always tells it way better than I do, but she had a tough day probably about 4 or 5 months after Elena's murder, and she gets out of the post office and in downtown Napa, and she turns on the car, and I believe Lord, I Need You by Matt Maher comes on the radio, and she's just like in tears because she's just having a day, right? She kind of just said like, look, I'm just turning this all over to you. She's a very strong Catholic woman, and she's very strong in her faith, and she turns and literally a rainbow is in front of her going straight up from the stoplight that she's sitting at. So imagine being within 10 yards of a rainbow, like it always moves, right?
Yeah.
And she goes and she literally drove through it in that moment. And she says, I don't understand what just happened, but she looks at it as if it's God's glory, right? For me personally, I had, I think the first time I drove up to Elena's gravesite by myself, I just really felt compelled to go there. My radio was on Sirius XM, like the radio station that I had. and it switched to my phone and started blasting Amazing Grace. Like literally somebody just took the volume knob and just spun it up high. And where I had to turn it down, it was so loud. And I'm like, what just happened? So I didn't touch anything. It literally switched from my radio to my phone and blasted Amazing Grace, which was one of the songs that her choir that she was a part of sang at her funeral. I switch it. It's on my phone, on my radio, and the song Halo by Beyonce comes on. And I'd never really listened to the lyrics, and you can interpret it any way you want in terms of basically what it's who it's geared towards. But the lyrics, I was listening to it as I was driving. I'm like, wow, it really does kind of resonate in my scenario of what's in my head right now. And when the song ends, it repeats again. And I'm like, okay, my phone's not on repeat. I haven't done that. Remember when we used to have like a Discman?
Yeah.
And you hit it repeat and the same song would just keep going. I know you can do it, but I didn't
takes
have
like
it.
3 clicks. You would know if you put it on
Yeah.
repeat.
So I thought, okay, well, maybe it's on repeat and I'm going to be listening to this for, 2 more times by the time I get to my other business, whatever. But the song ends and Imagine by John Lennon comes on next. And you've heard the lyrics by Imagine, which are pretty moving in their own way. And then that ended, and then 2 songs by Brian McKnight, which I love our old school R&B. And so Elena used to sing them with me. So these 2 songs come on and I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, wow. But all of these random things started to happen. And there was a lot in the beginning where I was like, okay, this is just random. And then at that point I'm like, all right, I need to do it. So I ended up contacting a medium to reluctantly to go like, okay, what's going on here? So I was turned on to a medium by a friend. Again, I was reluctant. And the first phone call, it ends up all on the phone. But it was to a specific person. It wasn't like dial a psychic type thing, right? Yeah. And she introduced herself, and then she's like, look, I'm not evidential. I'm not going to say there's a red teddy bear, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, fine. I've never done this before.
You had no expectations.
No expectations.
Okay.
I was definitely skeptical. She started with, Elena saying, hi, Daddy. And she's running with a soccer ball in a field. And I'm like, okay, you can get all that from Facebook, And then she says, Elena is telling me you're skeptical. Yes. And then she said, when her brother was 2, he fell and hit his head. And from that point on, he had anxiety and had like a dark cloud that kind of followed him around, that he worried about anxiety his whole life. Except now, after she broke kind of into Horcruxes and she gave her confidence to her brother. And I'm just sitting there like, what the F did you just say? Like, it was so specific.
Wow.
And he did. When we were in Cancun, he was running up the stairs and it was wearing like Crocs, like little kid Crocs at the time, and missed the step, split his head wide open. And he was super happy-go-lucky kid all the time, just funny and giggly and everything. And after that, they had to put him down because it split. Like literally, he's got a scar right above his eyebrow that it split it wide open. And we took him to the hospital. They had to put him under general because they're like, there's no way a 2-year-old's going to sit there while they're taking a needle and sewing his head, because he has to stay still. So when he woke up from the general anesthetic, he had like a 3-hour tantrum, and he had never thrown a tantrum in his life. That he just like freaked out. And then when we talked to somebody about it, they said, well, a lot of times when a child is put under and they weren't really supposed to be going, they weren't tired, they don't understand it, and there's like it just comes out of that. Yeah. And then after that happens, he's like, oh, I wrote my speech for Elena's funeral. And all of these moments where I'm just like, it just really resonated of how it changed him. And so I'm like, okay, we get to the end of the reading, and she's like, there's one other thing. She said, Elena's telling me that there's an envelope. And I said, okay. She said, like a manila envelope. She goes, do you have like a skinny table? Sure. Like a tall table, like an end table by a couch or something. I said, okay. And she says, there's a manila envelope on it. And I said, okay. She says, I keep asking her what's on the letter, but she's just smiling. She's not answering me. And she's like, do you know anything about that? And I said, no. And so she says, well, what do you like? Let me ask her again. And she's like, okay. She's like, no, she's not. I'm asking her what's on the letter, like what's on the letter in the envelope. And she just has this sarcastic smirk, which sounds like Elena, right? She gets it from her father. And no joke, I get home that day, and we have a hall kind of tall table right below a family portrait, and in the envelope there was a manila envelope on the wall, like or leaning up, that somebody had put in there. One of the people that lives with us, because we have a couple people that live there, put it on the table. And when I opened it up, it had 5 bracelets from Sergeant Ron Helis. So the officer that entered the building that lost his life with the 11 other victims, I reached out and said, can I get some, to our detective, and I said, can I get some bracelets for some of the officers in Napa that have done things for us as a thank you from a fallen brother? And just as a little gift to them as their token appreciation. So the envelope has 5 bracelets, no letter, no, here's the bracelets, have a good day, hope you guys are doing okay. Nothing, just 5 bracelets. So the medium kept saying, what's on the letter? And there was no letter, right? So, and then the other incident was a different time. This was like 8 months later, she said, so I've spoken to her a few times over the years, and she says, she's saying that you're still skeptical. I'm like, I'm always skeptical, like, right? And she says, she still likes to joke around about her boyfriend, about the red metal garden flowers, like their inside joke. And when I'd spoken to my therapist, I'm like, is this woman reading my mind, or like what's happening? And he goes, Arik, what this does prove is there's a lot that we don't know.
Right.
Like it's okay to accept the fact that we don't know everything, and we won't know everything. And that was a big turning point for me. And so I end up calling the boyfriend after, and I said, all right, this is a little weird, but I just spoke to a woman and she said this. And I said, it doesn't make any sense to me, but does this make any sense? And he says, what? I said, do you feel like her presence is around at times? And he goes, yeah, I did quite a bit for a little while. And then I said, did you have an inside joke about red metal garden flowers? And his response was, what the beep?
Yeah.
Right. And I go, yeah. And I go, yeah, do you understand? He goes, yeah, I understand. And I go, what is it? He goes, my mom's a good gardener, and we came back after school one day, and we were going to grab like a lemonade or something, sit in the backyard. And when we did, we see these red metal garden flowers, like spinny flowers that she had, garden stakes. And I was like, Mom, why do you have metal flowers? Like, you're a good gardener. And she said, they make me feel sophisticated. And so Elena would say, hey, let's go be sophisticated and sit in your backyard and talk and hang out.
Wow.
And so that was their
There's
inside
no way
joke.
she could have known that, or that you could have known that. No way.
I didn't even know it, right? And so I had to call him for him to go like, are you serious? And those are those moments that are just so mind-blowing to me that it's like, you can't make that stuff up, right? You can't make that up. So specific. No. She could have told me that story, and if I didn't know it was about the ex-boyfriend, I wouldn't even known who to call. I would be like, what are you talking about? You know?
So it just keeps you open-minded. There's a lot.
It just really does, right? I mean, our world is so, how do we change and create that? And that's with our foundation. It was like, be the positive change, and coming off of Gandhi's be the change in the world you want to see, but be the positive change. And our whole point is to like, how do we create change and do what we can in our pockets, in our society? Even if what you're doing only helps people in Northern California, that's awesome. If it's just in Roseville, that's awesome. Like if it's helping people, no matter how far it gets, if it's the whole world, even better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What about small acts of kindness? Like what if it just helps a cashier and that has a ripple effect across 10 people that they come in contact with? How important do you think small acts of kindness are?
I think they're huge. I mean, it's been amazing to me to see how much somebody did that to me to start. I think it was the week of the shooting, and I walked into a Starbucks. I'm like, oh, I need coffee. Like I was just struggling. I walk up and the cashier's like, your coffee's taken care of. And I was like, what's going on? And I look around the room and I don't see anybody that I know. Like I thought maybe, Trevor saw me and wanted to buy me coffee. Knew it's been a long week. And I was like, oh, okay. And then ended up that I could figure out who it was as I was leaving. And it was a random woman I'd never met before. And she just said, I thought you would appreciate this. Like, I know who you are or something. And I was like, oh, thank you. And so I started doing that. I do it quite a bit where I'll, coffee or dinner or a very large tip if somebody's really nice to me.
Are you prone to positive thinking? Like, do you have to put effort into staying positive? Do you ever see something that triggers negative emotion associated with that night, and how do you handle that?
I'd say the triggers for me are I don't watch nightly news hardly at all anymore because all it is shooting, 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 shooting. I struggle to watch a lot of television now, Dangerous Minds or, like all those kind of psycho thriller type things. It's too much to want to wrap my head around because it's too real. But, Ted Lasso's great, right? I mean, some of those things where you get into. So there's some amazing stuff out there. Yet we just choose not to let it affect us in that way.
Try to avoid any obvious negative input as where you can.
Yeah. Because the positive piece, yes, I've always been one who's kind of like, woken up and my glass was half full type of a thing. And so I've always had this kind of positive mindset and tried to be friendly with people. And so this has just kind of driven me further that way. I think one of the strongest things in moving forward is forgiveness, to allow that. And I am not, I don't allow myself to be angry at him. We don't really even know his name, to be honest, because somehow the system failed him. He was an ex-military, a lot of signs that he was violent and things would happen, but who would ever expect this to happen?
Sure.
Our foundation, specifically on the mental health piece, started doing something, just came out of randomly, is we call it bridge therapy. So I saw a post on Facebook, sounded very suicidal, of somebody that I knew. He was ex-military. I reached out to a friend who was a therapist and said, can you meet with this guy? And he said, yes, give him my number. So put him in touch with them, and come to find out he was suicidal and possibly going to hurt others and XYZ. And when they get out of the military, they say what they got to say to get out, right? And then once they're out and they get that stamp from the VA that they're clear, it's hard to get them back in to get the mental health services they need. So bridge therapy is, we had a 17-year-old teen, third attempted suicide, and the local medical provider that she had said, okay, we'll give you your therapy. You can go in 30 days. Your third attempted suicide in 30 days. Like when they come off the 5150.
Wow.
So what we do is we basically say, here's a number, call it, and we get them any therapy they need to get them till the next, we bridge that gap. Mm-hmm. So in our side, it was kind of one of those things where it just was our way of kind of giving back in a little way. If I could give any one little piece of advice, when you talk to people in and around tragedy.
Okay.
The best advice I'd say is you don't have to try to relate. Just tell them you care. And I say that because, when somebody walks up to me and says, I know it's not the same, but I lost my dog and it's been really hard. There's people I know that have gone through this, that it just angers them. For me, I don't take it personally because I know their heart is in the right place trying to say something. Yeah. But for me to turn to you and go I'm so sorry about hearing about your daughter's cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. It's not the same. And it's never the same, right? So the best thing is just say, I'm so sorry to hear, but I think it's amazing that she's doing well, and I hope that she continues to do so.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
And it's just better to just recognize, but then don't try to relate, because you just don't know where they are in their life.
And just listen. Listen, acknowledge, eye contact.
What a concept, right?
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a comment. Show these guests some support. What part impacted you the most so we can make them feel really good. These are real stories and raw emotions. Thank you.